recently installed a shelf under the sink in our Casita. This shelf sits on top of the wheel well and gives us a lot more room in there that was previously unused space. The materials and tools that I used, we'll start with materials. I used a piece of 1.5 wide by 1/8 inch thick flat aluminum, and I used some wire ties. Those are 6.5 inches long, I think, and a little wire clamp. I used some pop rivets. These are 3/16 with a 1/4 inch grip range. I got this 36-inch long stacking shelf from Menards to use for the shelving. I only needed 28 inches, so I had to cut it down a little bit. And then the tools I used were, I started off by, when I got the shelf in there, I had leveled up the camper to make sure it was sitting level first, and then I used a level to sit on top of the shelf in order to mark where I wanted the brackets to be. And there's a pop rivet tool for installing the pop rivet. There is a pair of pliers here. I use those to cut these little pieces of wire on the shelf, and then another pair of pliers that I use to cut off the excess length on the wire ties, a little Sharpie marker for marking the holes, and a drill. One of the things that I did was, this cabinet is right next to our fridge, so I didn't want to drill into the coils in the fridge, so I took a drill bit that was just not a good drill bit, it's just a junk one that I had around, and I cut the end of it off with a cutoff wheel on a grinder, and that way I could stick it in my drill and only have about a 1/2 inch or so sticking out. That way I didn't drill into my refrigerator. So I started off by making a couple of angle brackets. I used this flat bar and I cut it off 3 inches long, and then put it in the vise and folded it in half. Using a hammer, I just bent it over. Then on one side of the bend, I installed the 3/16 hole for the pop rivet, and on the other side I drilled a 1/4 inch hole to put the wire ties through. For cutting the shelf to length on these larger pieces, I used the cutoff wheel on the angle grinder, but you could use a hacksaw or a Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel, or even a pair of bolt cutters if that's what you had, to cut these down to length. And then for the small wires, I used, like I said, these pliers just to nip those off, and they were easy to cut with that. So after I cut it to length, we don't have the furnace in our camper, so I was able to utilize the whole area. It's 28 inches long, and I cut that to length. And then I put the shelf in, sitting on top of the wheel well, set the level on it, and determined the areas where I needed to notch. I needed to create a notch in it. Back there you can see where that plumbing comes through, the hot and cold water lines, and some wiring that comes through back there. So I cut off a couple of those wires on that corner for that stuff to go through. And then over here, the outlet that's on the outside of the camper, the box for that, I notched around that and just cut off the top piece of wire with the angle grinder, and then nipped off those little wire pieces. Those are the brackets that I installed, and those are pop riveted to the wall. And then I used wire ties to fasten the shelf to the little brackets. On this end, I used the little cable clamp, and I ran wire ties through it to secure it so it wouldn't move either front to back or side to side. The reason for doing this was that was really unused space back there, and this is where we keep things like our pots and pans, but it's also where the dog bowl gets stored and the trash can, and it was kind of unsanitary to have all of that stuff right next to each other. So this allows us to get the pans up off the floor in a nice secure way. And as you can see, that lip there will hopefully prevent it from sliding off while we're going down the road. Unless you're going across some of the bridges in Arkansas, they kind of tend to bounce things out. All in all, this was a pretty easy project to complete. It didn't take very long, and I think it's going to add a lot of storage capacity that was previously unusable space.